Hi, I'm Brian Dunn, and welcome to the most important podcast ever. What makes it so important? It's not about me, it's about you. This podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the moments of resilience, the lessons learned, and the small acts that make a big difference. From retail floors to boardrooms, we'll share the untold stories that shape lives and careers. This week, our guest is me, and our episode is about what I did on my summer vacation. And our friend Sean has been kind enough to step forward and volunteer and ask us some questions. Good evening, Sean.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Great, thanks.
So what inspired this golf trip to Ireland and Scotland, and why now?
Uh, that's a really interesting question. And one of the things I loved most about it was that my son William called me last year, late in the fall, and said, "Hey, Dad, I think it's time we went and did the Ireland trip and played the great courses." And he planned the whole thing from A to Z. And that was a first. I've always planned the vacations. So that alone made it very special for me. And it was time for us to do it.
So you've called this more than a trip. What were you hoping it would become?
Well, both sets of my grandparents are from Ireland. And I've been to Ireland before, but always in hotel rooms and meeting rooms and restaurants and retail stores, never really out on the countryside and putting my feet on the ground where my grandparents and before them walked. So it was very important to
So BJ didn't come along. How did that change the dynamic with Will and Joe?
me. I don't know that it changed the dynamic with Will and Joe as much as I keenly felt his absence because this was a bit of a pilgrimage for me, and I miss B every day. But B's not much of a golfer, and he doesn't care for it. So it's really not a great trip for someone that doesn't like golf. We played golf 10 times in 13 days.
So early on, you had a serendipitous airport encounter with a fellow golf lover. Did that feel like a sign?
It kind of did. It was an executive from Chartwell, Joe's investment banking company that he works for. And we ran into him at the airport. Joe introduced us all. And then he said, "Where are you going?" And he mapped out a couple of courses that were off the beaten trail. He was very familiar, but it was very positive indicator of what we had to look forward to. In fact, he said, and I believe this is a direct quote, "I'm envious of what you fellas have in front of you."
You met a few characters along the way, including the truck driver at Murphy Brown's. So what stands out about those encounters?
They were so great. So Murphy Brown's, it was jumping. I think it was a Friday or Saturday night. And our table was kind of tucked in the hallway where people had to walk past us. And this truck driver came up to us and he said, "You boys, truck drivers, no?" And we're like, "Well, not really." And he said, "No, you are. You look like it." And then he pointed at me, he said, "You're the boss." And I said, No, my sons are their own men." And anyway, it turns out he was hiding from the waiter and the manager because he was skipping out on paying for a big round of drinks. So he'd been big man and said, "I'm buying all the drinks." And then it was just funny that he was hiding in plain sight. And it was so fun to have that all sort of unfold. And my sons and I had a great laugh about it.
You went back to the Laurel one day on your own. What brought you back, and what did that solo moment mean to you?
That was an interesting time. Joe and Will were golfing. Dad had a well-earned day off. There was only room for a twosome that day. So I walked back to the Laurel, had a Guinness at about 11:45-ish a.m. and watched. There was a big Gaelic rugby or Gaelic football match going on that the Killarney town was going to play the winner if they won their semifinal. And I sat there by myself, had a lovely piece of salmon and a Guinness, and thought, life is good. Life is precious. And I had thought about this trip as a bucket list trip. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't a bucket list trip as much as it was my first trip there to play golf, and there'll be more. And it was sort of a metaphor for life, that there's far better things ahead of us than the things we leave behind.
During your travels, you ran into a group of people you had a connection with twice. What was that like, and how did it shape the feeling of the trip?
That was a really interesting thing. We were in North Berwick, and Will and I were down to have a pint and a flight of scotch, little scotch tasting. And I went to the bar to get it, and I came back, and Will was talking to this group. Well, sure enough, this group played basketball, a couple of them, or one of them maybe, with Will's coach at St. Thomas, Johnny Tower. And they said, we got to take a picture of you and I and send it to John. And then one of the guys said, you're Joe Dunn's dad. And another guy said, you're Brian Dunn. So somebody had a connection with us. And then later, we saw them at St. Andrews. And there were two more guys that I played softball against in my late teens and 20s. And they said, were your ears burning? Because we were talking about you and your buddy Paul last night, about how you always tormented us in the playoffs. And it was just amazing to me. So all these years later, over St. Andrews, and there are these people coming down the fairway. So the whole small world thing is absolutely true.
You played some legendary courses: Royal Portrush, Lahinch,
Yep.
Waterville, and of course, the old course at St. Andrews. What did that game teach you out there on those storied fairways and windswept links?
Well, it certainly taught me the meaning of the word respect. They're very, very challenging courses. But it was really such a thrill to walk on these grounds that are so legendary in golf. They had just played the US Open at Royal Portrush, and to walk where these greatest players in the world had just been playing, and on top of it, it's 150 years old. It's amazing. When we got to St. Andrews, that was really something for me. That's the oldest course in the world. It's where the game was invented. And to go out there, and I played my best round there too, so maybe that didn't hurt. But it was really, really, I had a real sense of the history of what was there, and it made it very, very special for me. Now, I should mention too, each of these places we had caddies, and the caddies were great. They would tell me the story of every hole. They would tell me jokes, some of which I can't repeat here, and we would talk about life, talk about our children, talk about our grandchildren they have. And it was just overwhelmingly positive experience.
So golf can bring out the best and worst in us. Was there a round or moment that caught you off guard emotionally?
I mentioned St. Andrews. I was really overwhelmed standing on the first tee of St. Andrews. And one of the guys that was playing with us, so it was Will and I, and then two men we didn't know, they were from the UK. And one of his name was George, and he looked at me and he said, I'm really nervous. And I said to myself, no shit, I am too. And that really captured it, because you're on this place, and Felix, who was the starter, gives this talk, and he talks about how this is where the game invented. This is the oldest course in the world. This is hallowed ground for golfers. This is the heartbeat of our town, and we're thrilled you're here to play it today. It was really cool, but you had a real sense of you wanted to do it justice.
What surprised you most about the trip, the people you met, or even something within yourself?
It was one of those moments, there's a couple things. It was one of those moments, and I've only happened a few times in my life when you're in the moment when you know it's a precious moment. And I'm playing St. Andrews with Will, who loves golf in much the same way I do. And we're walking down the first tee at St. Andrews. I was in the moment, and I knew this was one of those moments. I'll tell you something that surprised me about the trip, and I'm a little nervous to say it out loud. So I'm 91% Irish, 6% Scottish. I loved Killarney, loved my time in Ireland, but I really loved Scotland. And I don't think I'm supposed to feel that way. My grandparents are probably rolling over in their graves, but I really did. North Berwick and St. Andrews are towns. If I ever disappear and I don't show up for a studio session, I'm probably in North Berwick. I just loved it.
So, what's a moment from the trip with Joe or Will that you hope they'll never forget?
I hope they'll never forget us walking down any one of a number of fairways, the three of us together. We're out in a pub having a laugh. I had this real sense that I know I'm going to remember it forever, and I think they will too. And that moves me.
What did you learn about your sons that you hadn't fully appreciated before?
This might annoy them, but what I learned about my boys, they're fully grown men. They are full on grown men, and they are as much dear, dear friends to me as they are my sons. They're my best friends, the three of them, BJ, Will, and Joe. And I was really proud and a little sad. They're full on grown men. They're not my boys anymore.
With both sets of your grandparents having immigrated from Ireland, how did it feel to walk that land with your kids?
It felt really great, and I felt like it was, for me, it was an important moment. I think it was an important moment for Will and Joe because they were with me. But I did have a little sense that I was bringing them home, and somewhere up there, people are very happy I did. Sort of closed a circle.
Why did you choose Erin go Bragh, A Father and Son's Journey, as the title? What does Ireland Forever mean to you today?
Sean's referring to an essay I've written that's not quite ready to be published, but it will, and it'll be on my Substack. Please check it out. I'm going to tag it, link it, I guess. What it means to me is not Ireland the land as much it is a connection with roots and our history, our family history, and these places were so old. So America is going to be 250 years old next year, and that's a big deal for us, and we're super excited about it as a country. St. Andrews is 400 some odd years old. It's just staggering to me. So when I say Ireland Forever, it's that line of ancestry, that line of connection that really resonates deeply with me.
You've said before that you live by the compass, not the map. Did this journey recalibrate your compass?
Oh, for sure. And I do really believe in that notion. And I know it sounds like this wacky metaphor, but I think we're all kind of out here with compasses. I was in a meeting earlier today, and I said, somebody was talking about plans, and I said, man plans and God laughs. I have just found that the compass as a metaphor is just a much better way for me to navigate my way through this world. And what went into my compass on this trip was that there's a lot more fields to walk, and I'm really excited about
In the end, what are you most grateful for from this trip, and how did it change you?
it. I think it was a really stark reminder of how precious these moments are. And sometimes it's a barbecue on a Saturday afternoon, sometimes it's a ball game, and sometimes it's a trip to Scotland. But to be present and aware in the moment, I think, is the most important thing we can do to really savor the places and spaces we're in the moments we have, instead of always thinking about the next thing or the past thing. It really solidified my mind's eye to be present where I am in any given moment. And that's what I plan to keep with me from this trip.
Thank you for sharing all of that on that trip, and you brought, I think, a lot of meaning, and I almost felt like I could be there with you. There was so much emotion that came out of that trip that I'm sure the audience is going to feel the same way when they hear it.
Well, I'm glad that I hope the audience will indulge me on it. And I intend to at some point bring Will and Joe in to talk about their version of it. So I thank you so much, Sean, for helping us out. It's a shorter episode, but I thank you for indulging me in watching this. If you like the episode, please tell somebody. If you don't, send me a direct message and tell me, we're so sick of listening to you talk about yourself. That's it for this episode of the most important podcast ever. Big thanks to Sean for helping us out, and an even bigger thanks to you for listening or watching. And we will be back next week with programming you're more used to. Thanks for indulging me. Take care.